The smell of motor oil still clung to my clothes when I pulled into my driveway that night. 12 hours at the shop had left me dead on my feet. I just wanted to see her, my 1967 Camaro SS. 18 months of my life had gone into resurrecting her from a rusted shell into pure perfection. I clicked the garage remote. The door groaned open, revealing chrome so bright it could blind you and paint so deep you could fall into it. That's when my world detonated. "Someone call 911! He's stealing my car!" The voice sliced through the quiet. I turned, and there she was, Brenda Wilson, my neighbor, and the HOA president, charging across the lawn like a suburban pit bull with a cell phone already pressed to her ear. "Yes, there's a black man stealing my car right this second. Send everyone." Sirens were already wailing in the distance. She'd called before even confronting me. I was standing in my own driveway, holding my own keys, looking at my own car, about to be arrested for theft. What would you do if your neighbor weaponized the police against you in your own driveway? My name's Marcus, third-generation mechanic. My grandfather taught my father. My father taught me. We've been keeping cars alive in this town for 60 years. When my divorce finalized last spring, my wife deciding that grease under fingernails wasn't sexy, I used what I had left to buy a modest house in Willowbrook Estates, middle class, perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, everyone supposedly minding their own business, or so I'd been told. That Camaro? She wasn't some midlife crisis purchase. I found her at an estate sale, a rusted corpse most people would have traded for $30 in. Scrap, but I saw the beauty hidden under the decay. I paid $3,200 and spent every weekend for a year and a half bringing her back to life. New 350 small block engine, rebuilt turbo 400 transmission, complete suspension overhaul. The Hugger orange paint took 4 months of sanding, priming, wet sanding, until it could blind low-flying aircraft. I documented everything, every bolt, every gasket, every drop of sweat. Kept a binder thicker than a phone book for insurance. That car was my therapy. My Saturday morning coffee would go cold on the workbench while I lost myself in the meditation of mechanical perfection. Then there was Brenda, HOA president, self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, real estate agent. White BMW that got detailed more often than most people shower. Nails that had never touched real work. A smile that could freeze anti-freeze. She had the kind of personality that could turn a minor inconvenience into a crusade. She'd cited me. For grass she claimed was half an inch too long, showed up with a ruler. 2 weeks before tonight, she'd marched over complaining my impact wrench violated noise ordinances, even though the city allowed work until 9 p.m. But nothing compared to that Saturday morning. I overheard her bragging at her pool party that she'd just bought her new Camaro for $45,000 from a dealer in Phoenix, showing guests photos of a car identical to mine. I'd thought it was just her usual exaggeration, but the way she'd been staring at my Camaro lately, like a hawk watching prey, I should have known. By the time the police arrived, 2 patrol cars, lights blazing, Brenda was in full performance mode. "That's him! That's the car thief! I just bought that car yesterday!" I stayed calm. My father always said, "Documentation beats desperation every time." I showed the officers my restoration photos, rust bucket to rolling beauty, registration, insurance, even the handwritten bill of sale from the estate sale's elderly widow. The lead officer's expression shifted. Brenda's proof was nothing more than stock photos from the internet. No VIN, no paperwork. When they told her filing a false police report was a crime, the color drained from her face. But her eyes stayed locked on me. Cold. Calculating. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. Monday morning hit like a sledgehammer. I stumbled out in yesterday's work clothes, coffee in hand, and pulled the mail from my box. That's when I saw it, the envelope that would set the tone for the next round. HOA Notice of Covenant Violation. According to Brenda, my work van, A perfectly ordinary Ford Transit with Rodriguez Family Auto painted on the side was an unauthorized commercial vehicle and violated community standards. A $200 fine, 48 hours to comply, at the bottom. Brenda's signature, bold and smug, like she'd just won the lottery. Through the kitchen window, I watched her power walk past my driveway, shooting glances at my van as if it was parked on her grandmother's grave. Her morning jog suddenly had 17 laps past my house. I counted. Most people don't realize HOA covenants aren't suggestions. They're legal contracts. But my divorce lawyer had taught me something important. Every rule has a paper trail. And paper trails don't lie. That lunch break, I drove to the county courthouse and started digging. What I found was better than gold. My van, purchased in 2017, 3 years before Willowbrook passed their no commercial vehicles rule in 2020, which meant I was grandfathered in, immune to that restriction under state law. Brenda could complain until her voice gave out, but legally, she didn't have a leg to stand on. I drafted a rebuttal that would have made my old man proud. Clean, factual, airtight, attached copies of the purchase documents, and hand-delivered it to the HOA's management office. The receptionist's eyes widened as she read it. Oh dear, Mrs. Wilson isn't going to appreciate this. She was right. By Wednesday, my mailbox had turned into Brenda's personal complaint delivery system. Oil stains on my driveway, even though I power washed monthly. Excessive automotive odors from my garage. Apparently, WD-40 offends her delicate senses. And noise violations during legal hours. She was carpet bombing me with paperwork, hoping something would stick. That's when I made the smartest purchase of the entire war. Security cameras. 4 high-definition units, positioned with surgical precision. Night vision. Cloud storage. If Brenda so much as sneezed in my direction, it would be captured in crystal-clear video. The footage was revealing. Every morning, she'd patrol our shared fence line with her phone in one hand, a collapsible yardstick in the other, snapping photos and measuring distances like a suburban land surveyor. She wasn't just harassing me. She was building a case. Thursday evening, I got the summons. Emergency HOA board meeting. 7 p.m. That night. No agenda, no real notice, just enough to be legal on paper. I showed up at the community center expecting a courtroom. Instead, I found Brenda, her timid Lieutenant Clara, and Janet, the board's enthusiastic nodder. 3 people. Brenda's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. We're implementing an emergency ban on all automotive repair activities, effective immediately. Past violations carry a $500 fine. I didn't even blink. I just opened the HOA bylaws on my phone. Section 4.3 requires 7 days' notice for voting matters. Section 4.7 requires a quorum of 5 board members for any official decision. I count 3 people. This meeting has all the authority of a book club. Clara looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Well, this is just a preliminary. And Section 2.9 says invalid meetings create personal liability for board members, I cut in. So unless you want your names on the lawsuit, I suggest we end this charade now. Brenda's composure cracked. Her voice dropped an octave. You think you're smart, don't you? Coming in here with your people and your activities. My father's voice echoed in my head. Stay calm. Stick to facts. Let them hang themselves with their own rope. I think I'm a homeowner who reads contracts before signing them, I said. Her glare could have burned paint. The next day, my ally appeared, in the form of Tom, the mailman, who strolled over, after his route. Most of us think she's completely lost it, he said. Want to grab coffee tomorrow? I think it's time we talked. The following morning, before I could even meet Tom, another knock came at my door. City Code Enforcement. Clipboard. Serious face. Mr. Rodriguez, we've had an anonymous complaint about unlicensed commercial auto repair. I invited him in. The smell of fresh polish and clean motor oil filled the air. My tools hung in perfect order. No customer cars, no cash register. Just my Camaro and a workbench cleaner than most kitchens. Jesus, he said, running a finger across the spotless surface. This is cleaner than the shop I take my truck to. He left, shaking his head. Off the record, this is the 4th time this month I've been here. Same complainant, different story every time. Lady needs a new hobby. But Brenda wasn't looking for a hobby, she was looking for an angle. The next blow came via certified mail, a formal complaint to my homeowner's insurance company, claiming my garage was a fire hazard threatening neighboring properties. I braced for a nightmare. Instead, my insurance agent, Bill, spent the first 10 minutes drooling over the Camaro's engine bay. "Whoever's doing this to you is playing a dangerous game," he said. "And your fire setup? Better than commercial standards. Half the garages in this neighborhood are death traps." His report not only cleared me, it warned Brenda to stop filing false claims or face insurance fraud charges. And just when I thought it might slow down, she escalated again. Her newest weapon? Social media. A Willowbrook Neighborhood Watch Facebook group appeared overnight. Her first post was a masterpiece of fake sweetness and coded venom, photos of my work van and garage, with a caption, "Just concerned about maintaining our beautiful community standards. Certain activities might be better suited for industrial zones. Don't you think?" Some neighbors defended me. Others stayed quiet. But Brenda? She deleted any supportive comments, igniting a war in the comment section. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't random harassment. This was a campaign, and campaigns have endgames. Sunday morning greeted me with silence, until I opened my front door. The driveway glittered. Not from sunlight on fresh concrete, but from metal. 24 roofing nails, not scattered, placed. Each one positioned with care, their points angled. Upward, waiting to pierce rubber. I didn't need to guess who'd done it. My security cameras had been running all night. The 2 a.m. footage was grainy, but the figure in the dark hoodie had a distinctive quick-step march, the same one I'd seen on Brenda's morning jogs. She moved with the jittery energy of someone committing their first felony. Every motion screamed, "Don't get caught." But she was standing under my motion-activated floodlight for a solid 15 seconds. Long enough for the camera to capture her face. Officer Morgan showed up 20 minutes after my call. He photographed every nail, bagged a few for evidence, and reviewed the footage in silence. "Classic intimidation pattern," he said finally. "Document everything. Cases like this simmer for months, then explode into arrests." But Brenda wasn't stopping at sabotage. While reviewing the footage later that day, I spotted something else. Her morning patrols weren't just nosy walks. She was mapping my property line. Photos, measurements, angles, military-grade surveillance. For what? The answer arrived Wednesday in my mailbox. A plain white envelope. No return address. Inside, one sheet of printer paper. "Your kind doesn't belong here. Leave voluntarily or face escalating consequences." The paper stock? The exact same watermark as the HOA notices Brenda left. Same faint printer roller lines. I took it straight to Detective Martinez, who'd been assigned to my case. She held it with gloved hands, her eyes narrowing. "This qualifies for hate crime prosecution under both state and federal statutes," she said. "And based on what you've already documented, we're building a substantial criminal case against your neighbor." That night, I sat in Tom's coffee shop with 5 other neighbors. Mike, a lawyer, had been fined for having the wrong font on his mailbox. Sarah, an accountant, had been cited for planting flowers without architectural approval. Linda, a teacher, had gotten violation letters for having kids play in her own driveway. One by one, we laid our stories out like cards on a table. And in that moment, I realized Brenda had made her biggest mistake. She'd created her own worst nightmare, a united neighborhood with a common enemy. We weren't just going to defend ourselves. We were going to dig. 2 days later, I found Myself in the basement of the county courthouse, surrounded by the smell of old paper and stale coffee. The records clerk slid a dusty box toward me. HOA financials are in there, she said. Good luck making sense of them. 3 hours in, I struck gold. The HOA's expense records were a patchwork of payments to companies I'd never heard of, $15,000 to B&B Property Solutions for consulting services, $8,500 to Brenda's Best Gardens for landscaping that had never been done, $12,000 to Wilson and Associates for legal fees, starting the exact month Brenda filed for divorce. One address connected all three, Brenda's House.BNB Property. Solutions, sole proprietor, Brenda Wilson, Brenda's Best Gardens, dissolved last year after doing 0 projects, Wilson and Associates, her ex-husband's law firm. Over 2 years, she'd siphoned at least $78,000 from HOA funds into her personal accounts, but it went deeper. Cross-referencing dates of HOA violations with real estate records, I saw the pattern. She targeted homeowners, escalating fines, nitpicking rules, until they sold their houses below market value out of sheer exhaustion. Then, as a licensed real estate agent, Brenda swooped in, sold the property to investor friends, collected double commissions, and pocketed kickbacks. 3 families had left Willowbrook in the past year alone. The Hendersons, fined for their sons. Basketball hoop until they caved and sold. The Patels, cited for culturally inappropriate cooking odors until they moved away. And now, me. But then I found the one document that made me sit back in my chair and laugh. Foreclosure notice. Brenda's own house was in default, $23,000 in unpaid HOA dues to her own association, back taxes, attorney fees, the works, her foreclosure. Hearing? 4 weeks away, everything clicked. The harassment, the false police reports, the nails in my driveway, all of it was a desperate play. She needed me gone so she could get a commission big enough to save her own skin. And now, I had the proof. I made copies of every incriminating document. When I called Tom, my voice was calm. But inside, I felt like I was holding the detonator to a bomb. You sitting down? I asked. Because what I just found changes everything. Saturday morning, Tom's garage became mission control. Coffee, donuts, and a folding table covered in paper. Sarah pored over Brenda's financials like a forensic bloodhound. Mike scanned documents with the satisfaction of a shark smelling blood. Linda made a giant poster board timeline mapping Brenda's harassment campaigns to the property sales. Carlos, our contractor neighbor, leaned back and let out a whistle. She's been using HOA money to pay her divorce lawyers. That's not criminal. Genius. That's criminal stupid. The plan formed quickly. Operation Documentation Fortress. Security cameras everywhere. Nothing Brenda did would go unrecorded. Incident report blitz. Standardized forms, times, dates, photos, police report numbers. Independent audit. Sarah would get an outside accounting review that could stand up in federal court. Legal annihilation. Mike would file a criminal complaint for embezzlement, harassment, and false police reports. Public humiliation. Linda would launch a neighborhood flyer campaign and social media blitz. We would let Brenda think she was winning. Rope-a-dope. Let her keep swinging wild until she was too deep to climb. Out. The timing was perfect. Audit in 2 weeks, foreclosure in 3, board elections in 4. 3 disasters all heading toward her at once. By the time we broke that morning, the air smelled like coffee, motor oil, and justice. Brenda had no idea. The trap was already closing. Monday morning, the neighborhood woke to the sound of Brenda's voice echoing across the street like a siren with attitude. From my kitchen window, I watched her pacing her driveway, phone glued to her ear, hair frizzed from stress. Even at 7 a.m., she looked like a CEO on the verge of a hostile takeover, except her company was crumbling. "I need an emergency board meeting tonight," she barked into the phone. "Something's happening, and I need legal protection." Clara shuffled, over reluctantly, like a kid summoned to the principal's office. Janet followed, her usual cheer dampened by something heavier, doubt. By noon, every mailbox in Willowbrook had received Brenda's latest Hail Mary, an emergency legal defense assessment of $500 per household. The letter claimed I was threatening to sue the entire HOA, and immediate payment was needed to hire attorneys. She had no idea Tom was parked across from that meeting the night before with a digital recorder running. "They're investigating our finances," her voice hissed through the tiny speaker when we played it back later in Tom's garage. "I don't know how much they know, but we need to control the narrative before this gets out of hand." "Brenda, maybe we should just—" Clara started. "No. I've worked too hard to let them destroy everything. If I have to leave town—" "Fine, but I'm not going down alone." Mike's grin was pure predator. "That," he said, "is admissible." 2 days later, she made her first big mistake. My cameras caught her at 2:47 a.m., dressed like a bargain bin ninja, black hoodie, yoga pants, and a headlamp that made her look like a raccoon with a flashlight. She crept along the side of my garage, carrying a small plastic tub. Under the floodlight, it was crystal clear. She was staging evidence. A few old motor oil containers, still with Home Depot price stickers on them, neatly placed behind my garage. By 8:00 a.m., a city code, inspector was at my door. He found the planted containers in less than a minute. "These are brand new," he said flatly. "And for the record, fresh motor oil isn't even considered an environmental violation. Filing a false environmental report is a federal offense. I'll be adding this to my fraud report." Brenda's frustration boiled over that afternoon on Facebook. The Willowbrook Neighborhood Watch Group became her personal diary, and a public unraveling. Her posts shifted from passive-aggressive to outright hostile. "Some people don't understand that communities have standards," she wrote at 2:13 a.m. "When certain elements move in and change the character of established neighborhoods, decent people have to take action." Screenshot. Saved. Forwarded to Martinez. By Friday, desperation had turned to bribery. Carlos was installing cameras at Linda's when Brenda strolled up, envelope in hand. "I know Marcus is paying you to lie about me," she said. $2,000. Cash if you forget about those cameras and stop helping with this harassment campaign. Carlos kept working, his phone recording every word. "I'm just helping my neighbors protect their property, Mrs. Wilson." Her voice pitched higher. "I don't need lawyers. I need this neighborhood back under control. That man has turned everyone against me with his lies." The desperation in her voice was so thick you could spread it on toast. But she wasn't done. Sunday night, my phone buzzed. "Officer Morgan. Marcus, you're not going to believe this. She just filed another report. Claims you threatened her with a weapon during a driveway confrontation." I looked around. 3 witnesses stood in my garage watching me rebuild. A neighbor's transmission at the exact time of the alleged incident. "Ma'am, this is your 4th false report in 2 weeks," Morgan told her. "You're looking at charges." By Monday morning, the storm broke. Sarah's encrypted email hit our group chat at 7:42 a.m., audit results. Final Brenda hadn't stolen $78,000. She'd stolen closer to $96,000 over the past 30 months, siphoning money through phantom vendors, inflated service contracts, and outright fake maintenance charges. "She's a career criminal," Sarah said at our emergency meeting that night, "and she's running out of both money and time." 2 nights later, she crossed the line from petty sabotage into felony territory. At 2:33 a.m., Brenda unlocked the HOA management office with a stolen master key. My contact in building security sent me the footage. She looked like a raccoon in a human costume, frantically feeding documents into the shredder. The silent alarm tripped within seconds. When Officer Rodriguez arrived, she was elbow-deep in paper. "Snow! You don't understand!" she yelled as he cuffed her. "They're destroying everything I've built. This community was perfect before they came." Watching that footage later, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Her bail was set. At $25,000, more than she could dream of paying. She spent 3 days in county lockup, and while she was inside, Clara made her move. She visited Brenda in jail with a recorder hidden in her purse. "I need your help," Brenda whispered through the phone. "There's money in my garage. Cash. We can both disappear before this gets worse. 50,000. Help me and we start over somewhere." Mike replayed that clip 3 times, each one slower than the last. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we now have conspiracy, theft, obstruction, and flight risk. This is the kind of case prosecutors fight over. The trap had officially sprung." Thursday evening, the community center looked different. Not the usual half-empty room with a board. No, this was standing room only. 43 households had shown up, some with folding chairs from home, others standing in the back, arms crossed, eyes locked on the front table. Word had spread. Tom stood at the podium, flanked by Sarah and Mike. Behind them, taped to the wall, was Linda's massive color-coded timeline. Bright lines connected harassment incidents to property sales, each one ending with Brenda's signature in black ink. Sarah stepped forward first. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've completed a full audit of the HOA's finances." She held up a thick binder, the pages heavy with receipts and bank statements. Over the last 3 years, Mrs. Wilson has diverted a total of $112,000 from HOA funds into personal accounts and shell companies. Gasps, murmurs. One man in the back let out a sharp whistle. "That's an average theft of $2,800 per household," Sarah continued, "and that's not counting the legal fees we're about to incur to clean up the mess." The anger in the room was electric. Years of petty citations, nitpicking, and intimidation all boiling to the surface. Mike took the mic. "In addition to the financial theft, we have documented false police reports, harassment campaigns, and racial intimidation tactics. Every single one of you has either been directly affected or lives in a community that's been poisoned by this behavior." Someone shouted from the back, "Vote her out!" And that's exactly what happened. The vote of no confidence was unanimous, except for Janet, who abstained while staring at the floor. The board passed an immediate motion to remove Brenda from her position, pursue criminal prosecution, and demand full restitution with interest. By the time I walked out into the cool night air, I knew there was no going back. The next morning, the media came. Channel 7's white news van rolled in before dawn, their satellite dish rising against the pink morning sky. By 8 a.m., 2 more stations had arrived, and the cul-de-sac was lined with tripods and microphones. Reporter Janet Mills, a storm chaser in heels, stuck a mic in my face. "Mr. Rodriguez, can you tell our viewers what this is really about?" Chose my words carefully. "It's not about revenge. It's about accountability. When someone abuses a position of trust and targets their neighbors to protect themselves, they should answer for it." The story exploded online. HOA was trending nationwide by noon. Stories from other neighborhoods poured in. Tales of petty dictators, stolen funds, and targeted harassment. Brenda's face, her mugshot from the document-shredding arrest, was everywhere. Her brokerage suspended her real estate license within hours. Former clients started coming forward with their own complaints. It was like a dam had broken, and every ugly truth that had been kept under wraps came rushing into daylight. Meanwhile, we kept building the case. Carlos's footage of the bribery attempt, the oil can frame job, the false reports, Sarah's audit, Clara's jailhouse confession recording. Martinez was piecing it all into a prosecution package that would be airtight, but Brenda wasn't done destroying herself. At 3:07 a.m. Saturday morning, she went live on Facebook, mascara smeared, voice trembling. She sat in her dimly lit living room, clutching a tissue like a prop. "I was just trying to protect our community," she sobbed. "Sometimes good people have to make hard decisions. These outsiders have twisted everything." The comments section was brutal. Neighbors posted screenshots of violation letters, photos of nails in driveways, copies of inflated HOA invoices. Within hours, she deleted the video. But screenshots last forever. By the following Tuesday, she was back in court, this time for a bail hearing. The prosecutor laid out the charges: embezzlement, harassment, filing false police reports, destruction of evidence, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and hate crime enhancements. Her attorney, a frazzled public defender, argued for reduced bail, citing community ties and leadership experience. Judge Hernandez wasn't buying it. "Leadership is not a license to steal," she said, raising the bail to $50,000. Brenda's jaw dropped. She glanced back toward the small knot of supporters, which had dwindled to just Janet and one woman I didn't recognize. Neither met her eyes. When court adjourned, Martinez pulled me aside. "We're going to move fast. She's desperate, and that makes her dangerous. But it also makes her sloppy. Every day she's out, she's digging herself deeper." I knew exactly what she meant. That night, Tom's garage wasn't just a meeting spot, it was a command center. The walls were covered in charts, photos, and legal documents. Linda had updated the timeline to include Brenda's failed social media campaign. Sarah had added new financial records showing yet another shell company. "We've got her boxed in," Mike said, leaning over the table. "The only question is whether she pleads out or takes this all the way to trial." I thought about the months of harassment, the nails in the driveway, the police at my door, the threatening letter, and now seeing her crumble under the weight of her own lies. "She's not the type to admit defeat," I said. "She's going to fight, and she's going to lose, because the truth was no longer just ours. It belonged to everyone." The courthouse smelled like coffee that had been burned into the walls over decades. Thursday morning, the place was packed, not just with lawyers and clerks, but with neighbors. 40-plus households from Willowbrook Estates had come together, carpooling, bringing coffee, even wearing matching community over-corruption buttons Linda had printed the night before. It felt like we were heading to a championship game. Brenda sat at the defendant's table, wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed spectacularly with her bleach-blonde highlights. The woman who once roamed the neighborhood with a clipboard and a smug smile now looked small. Not defeated, not yet, but stripped of the illusion of control she'd clung to for years. Channel 7's cameras had front-row seats. Janet. Mills was already calling this the most satisfying HOA story of the decade. When Judge Hernandez called for victim impact statements, my name was first. My legs felt heavy walking to the stand. 3 months ago, I'd been just a quiet mechanic. Now I was speaking for an entire neighborhood. "Your Honor," I began. "This started when Mrs. Wilson called the police on me for opening my own garage. But it was never really about a car. It was about power, control, and what happens when someone decides they can terrorize their neighbors without consequence." I described the false police reports, the nails in my driveway, the threatening letter. I talked about the fear, how Brenda had weaponized authority to make people feel unsafe in their own homes. "She didn't just steal money," I said, glancing at Brenda, who wouldn't meet my eyes. "She stole our peace of mind, our sense of community, our belief that neighbors look out for each other, not prey on each other." Tom went next, his postal worker's voice steady and direct. Sarah followed, presenting the audit results in sharp, clinical detail. Linda spoke about the kids in the neighborhood, how even they had felt the tension, how families avoided each other because of the constant fear of being targeted. Then it was Brenda's turn. Her public defender stood, delivering a performance worthy of community theater, mental health struggles, divorce trauma, financial pressures. Everything except personal responsibility. "My client deeply regrets her actions," he said. "She's willing to make full restitution and undergo counseling." When Brenda rose to speak, she dabbed at her eyes with tissues that had seen More action than a NASCAR pit crew. I never meant to hurt anyone, she said, voice trembling. This community meant everything to me. I was just trying to maintain standards, protect property values. Sometimes leadership requires difficult decisions. The collective eye roll in the room was practically audible. Even her own attorney seemed to shrink at the words. Judge Hernandez leaned forward, her voice calm, but weighted. Ms. Wilson, in 30 years on this bench, I've rarely encountered such a systematic abuse of fiduciary responsibility combined with harassment and intimidation. You held a position of trust and used it to steal from the very people who elected you. You targeted a minority homeowner with false police reports that could have resulted in tragedy. You destroyed evidence, attempted to flee jurisdiction, and even now refuse to accept full responsibility. The silence in the courtroom was so complete, I could hear someone's watch ticking behind me. This court sentences you to 4 years in state prison, the judge continued. Full restitution of $112,000 plus court costs and 5 years of supervised probation following your release. The gavel came down like a hammer. Applause erupted. Not polite applause, but the deep, resonant kind that comes when justice feels earned. Judge Hernandez didn't even try to quiet it. As deputies led Brenda away in handcuffs, she finally looked back. Her eyes weren't remorseful. They were full of the same cold hatred she'd shown me that night in my driveway, but it didn't matter anymore. Outside the courthouse, the steps were crowded with neighbors. Reporters swarmed. Microphones. Out, cameras rolling. Mr. Rodriguez, one asked, what would you tell other homeowners dealing with HOA abuse? I thought about everything. The fear, the documentation, the long nights planning in Tom's garage, the trap we'd built together, not out of revenge, but necessity. Document everything. Build community. Truth wins, I said. Those 3. Short sentences would go viral within hours. HOA reform groups picked them up. Victims from across the country shared them. The phrase became a rallying cry for neighborhoods ready to take their own power back. That night, Tom hosted a backyard cookout. It wasn't just about celebrating Brenda's downfall. It was about reclaiming something we'd lost, the ability to laugh freely in our own yards. Kids ran between grills, neighbors swapped recipes, and the air smelled like freedom, charcoal, and ribs. Standing there, I realized something profound. We hadn't just defeated Brenda. We'd become a community. 6 months after the sentencing, Willowbrook Estates didn't look the same. It felt different, too. The tension that had once hung over the streets like a summer haze was gone. In its place was something warmer. The sound of lawnmowers, kids, laughing in driveways, the smell of barbecue drifting on Saturday mornings. Our new HOA board, Tom as president, Sarah as treasurer, Mike handling legal, had implemented concepts so radical it was almost funny. Transparency, common sense, and respect. Monthly financial reports were posted online. Board meetings were actually announced in advance. Violation notices required photographic evidence and reasonable timelines, and for the first time in years, people trusted the HOA. The Community Garden Project, something Brenda would have strangled in its cradle with citations, now flourished behind the clubhouse. Linda ran it like a general commanding an army, assigning planting schedules and keeping everyone's tomatoes in line. Watching neighbors who'd barely spoken before share seedlings and recipes. That was better than any trophy I'd ever won. Ironically, property values went up, 15% in just 6 months. Turns out, neighborhood that kicked out corrupt HOA president was more appealing to buyers than neighborhood where HOA president steals money. Restitution. Payments began arriving in installments. Each household got their stolen money back, plus interest. Watching neighbors pay off credit cards, fix up their homes, or plan long-delayed vacations felt like economic justice in its purest form. As for Brenda, according to Clara, who still visited out of guilt or morbid curiosity, prison life didn't suit her. She worked laundry detail for 60 cents an hour, sharing a cell with a woman serving time for armed robbery. The woman who once weaponized a clipboard now folded towels under the watch of guards who didn't care how many community standards she'd enforced. Our story started traveling beyond Willowbrook. A group of documentary students from the state university came knocking, cameras in hand. They called it Garage Door Justice, an American story. It won the regional film festival and got picked up for national distribution. The screening Q&A was surreal. Me on stage under hot lights, answering questions about a war I never asked. To fight, I donated my appearance fees to start the Willowbrook Automotive Education Scholarship, funded entirely by Brenda's ongoing restitution payments. 3 local teens had already received scholarships for technical college automotive programs. One of them, Linda's nephew Diego, graduated this spring. When he walked across the stage in his cap and gown, I swear it felt better than firing. Up my Camaro's rebuilt engine for the first time. Speaking of the Camaro, she'd become famous in her own right. Featured in classic car magazines as the muscle car that took down an HOA Karen. I'd had offers to buy her for sums that would make a sensible man think twice. But some things aren't for sale. And my personal life, well, that took a turn I hadn't expected. Sarah and I started seeing each other. Slowly, carefully. It turned out that forensic accountants and mechanics had more in common than we thought. We both liked puzzles. We both believed in details. And we'd both seen what happened when people abuse power. On Sundays, I still took the Camaro to shows, but now I brought kids from the neighborhood who wanted to learn engines. I let them climb under the hood, get their hands dirty, and feel the magic of bringing metal to life. Carlos Jr., barely 13, adjusted valve clearances like he'd been born with a wrench in his hand. His father stood watching, pride shining in his eyes. The fight we'd gone through had left something behind, a skill set, a story, and a warning. Other neighborhoods started calling. Emails came from strangers in Phoenix, Denver, Miami, all dealing with their own Brendas. I started helping them. Pro bono. Sharing documentation strategies, meeting over Zoom to walk them through bylaws, even helping draft incident reports. Mike was invited to speak at legal conferences about fiduciary duty violations. Our case started popping up in HOA fraud prosecutions across 3 states. And then came the biggest surprise of all, the Willowbrook Act, a state bill requiring annual financial audits for all HOAs with budgets over $50,000. The governor signed it into law last month. We were invited to the signing ceremony. It was a good photo op, but the real win was knowing other communities wouldn't have to go through what we had. One evening, I was sitting in my garage, wiping down the Camaro's fenders, when I heard kids laughing out front. I stepped outside. Tom was mowing his lawn. Linda was handing out fresh-baked bread to a couple across the street. Sarah waved from her porch. No tension. No staring matches, no fear, just neighbors. The way it was supposed to be, and I thought, maybe this is the real victory. Not just sending Brenda to prison, not just getting the money back, but proving that when good people stand together, they can turn a battlefield into a community again. The scholarship letter sat on my workbench, edges still crisp from the envelope. Dear Mr. Rodriguez, I'm writing to thank you for making my dream possible. It was from a kid named Eli. His dad was a veteran, his mom a nurse. Money had been tight. The scholarship, funded by restitution payments from the woman who once tried to destroy my life, was sending him to technical college. I read it twice, then set it next to the old yellowed bill of sale for my Camaro. The one signed by Eleanor Hutchinson, the widow who'd trusted me to bring her husband's rusted dream back to life. Funny how life works. That car had started as a project, a distraction from divorce, something to fix with my hands when I couldn't fix anything else. But it ended up becoming the centerpiece of a fight that changed everything, not just for me, for my whole neighborhood. Even now, the Camaro gleamed. Under the garage lights, her hugger orange paint so deep it looked like you could dive in. People at car shows still asked me about the HOA Karen story, and I'd tell them, not to brag, but to remind them, it's not the size of your problem, it's the strength of your documentation and your community. That was the real revelation. When Brenda first came after me, I'd felt isolated, alone, but she'd underestimated something important. That fear has a way of forging connections. Every time she targeted someone else, she was building the very alliance that would take her down. In the months after the sentencing, we kept that alliance alive. Monthly block parties, the community garden, group projects to help each other with repairs. One Saturday, Carlos organized a neighborhood fix-it day. Everyone with tools and skills pitched in to help with projects people had been putting off for years. We fixed fences, tuned up lawnmowers, replaced storm-damaged siding. Even the kids joined in, hauling scraps and learning how to use drills. It hit me, watching that. This was the kind of neighborhood Brenda claimed she was protecting, but had actually been destroying. Sarah came over later, 2 lemonades in hand. We sat on the tailgate of my truck, watching the sun sink over Willowbrook. "You know," she said, "you could do this full-time." "Do what?" "Help other neighborhoods fight back. You've already been doing it. You've got the story, the credibility, the proof it works." I laughed. "Yeah, and the gray hairs to show for it." But the truth was, I'd already started. Calls, emails, Zoom meetings, teaching people how to read their HOA bylaws, how to gather evidence, how to build coalitions, helping them understand that fighting back wasn't just possible, it was winnable. The best calls were the follow-ups, hearing, "We voted them out," or "They resigned," or "We caught them." It was like passing the torch, each victory adding another layer to the belief that ordinary people can take on entrenched power and win. One afternoon, Tom stopped by with a stack of mail. "Fan letters," he said, grinning. "You're practically famous now." The letters were from all over the country. People thanking me, telling me their own HOA horror stories, asking for advice. It was humbling, and it reminded me of something my father used to say in the shop. You don't fix a car by yelling at the engine, you fix it by knowing how it works and putting in the work. Same thing with communities. The last restitution check came in that fall. I didn't cash it right away. For a couple days, I just let it sit on the counter, not because I needed the money, but because it felt like a bookend. Brenda's name was still on it, even though she was somewhere in the state prison system, probably folding more laundry. Thought about her sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with clarity. She'd built her power on intimidation and control, and she'd lost it all because she couldn't imagine a world where her neighbors stood together. That was her blind spot, and our advantage. The last block party of the summer brought everyone out. Kids ran through sprinklers. Carlos grilled enough, burgers to feed an army. Linda brought pies that vanished in minutes. Even the older residents, the ones who'd stayed quiet during the Brenda years, came out, lawn chairs in hand, smiles on their faces. When the sun dipped low, Sarah stood, up with a microphone. "I just want to say, this neighborhood isn't perfect, but it's ours. And it's better than it's ever been because we stopped letting fear run it." Applause rolled across the yard. I looked around at all those faces. People who'd once avoided eye contact at the mailbox, now laughing together under strings of lights. And I knew this wasn't just the end of a fight. It was the start of something stronger. Later that night, after the tables were cleared and the lights taken down, I sat in my garage with the Camaro idling, that familiar rumble vibrating through my chest. The moonlight caught the chrome just right. I thought about the first night this all began, standing in this same driveway, holding my keys while sirens wailed, accused of stealing my own car. And I thought about where we'd ended. Up. Brenda was gone. The neighborhood was alive again. The scholarship fund was growing. And somewhere out there, other communities were using our story as proof that they could win too. If there was a moral to all of it, it wasn't complicated. Power doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the people willing to stand together. And sometimes ordinary people don't just survive the fight, they change the rules entirely.